Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, November 17th, 2025, and today we are going to discuss gravel mulches, storing seeds, and it's Feedback Monday. So let's do it. All right, happy Monday, everyone. I hope you all had nice weekends. And Hannah and I took a trip down to Columbia, South Carolina to the CFSA Sustainable Ag Conference. Always one of my favorites, and it was a load of fun. Got to see some great talks and meet a bunch of amazing people. I will talk more about that tomorrow, and you can maybe hear a little bit of it in my voice, but I have some great content for you all coming soon, but huge shouts to Mary Beth and everyone over there at CFSA. They truly do run one of the best conferences in the country. Anyway, like I said, I'll have more on that soon, but also wanted to give a shout out to Mike for putting the shows together on Thursday and Friday while we traveled. Speaking of, make sure to keep your farm videos coming to Farmer Mike at no-tillgrowers.com. We want to see some of those garden recipes, especially as we head into Thanksgiving next week. That should be fun. Or just send us your 20-second farm video. How is the fall coming along? Or the spring, if you're in that Southern Hemisphere area. We are always curious about what you all have going on. All right, so today we are going to cover some of last week's feedback, but in true Farmer Jesse changes stuff up sometimes fashion, we're calling an audible and putting the feedback at the, back of this episode, because I wanted to stick to our mulch series for the first segment, as we have dutifully been doing the last few Mondays and Tuesdays. Anyway, expect some wonkiness around the holiday/farm conference season with this show, but yes, in continuation of our mulch series, I thought we would talk a bit about gravel mulches. This is without a doubt an off the beaten path mulch, if ever there was one, or maybe the most beaten path, I suppose, because we're literally talking about gravel. But anyway, the idea being that, well, a grower would use gravel as a pathway or even potentially a perennial bed mulch. Why, you might ask, why would anyone add rocks to their garden on purpose? Well, sometimes you just use what you've got, and some people, it seems, got gravel, and also most people are not using them in their gardens. Let me explain. Gravel mulching is actually more common than you might assume, but obviously not for vegetable gardens. So gravel mulching, sometimes called lithic mulching, is using anything from sand to pebbles to volcanic rock, etc., in an effort to mulch the soil for water retention, sometimes heat retention, sometimes protection from footsteps, erosion, all that typical stuff. And in fact, there are many different and many ancient examples. The Anasazi, incredibly inventive food producers that they are, used this innovation, specifically pebbles, for a short time and or during droughts to help retain water in the southwestern United States, which is very dry for those of you who don't live in the United States, in their agricultural production, but perhaps primarily to meet increased demand for cotton for trade at the time. Anyway, not only did it work, but it still works today in terms of deep water infiltration. Those areas mulched in the 14 and 1500s are still retaining water better than areas without pebble slash cobble mulch. Of course, it wasn't just the Anasazi. There's some version of lithic mulching going back thousands of years all over the world, from the Romans in vineyards and orchards around Italy to several areas of China where sand and gravel were used and still are to some extent. Easter Island is another one. Most commonly, these practices were, and like I said, sometimes still are, used where water is incredibly precious and scant. But I want to be sure to be exceedingly clear about this. I am definitely not recommending rocks as a mulch, just exploring it because I'm a nerd and I think it's interesting. Rocks are heavy. Rocks are fairly expensive. Rocks are often something you want less of in your garden. Also, there is some research that suggests they could have negative effects on beneficial fungi, and others research actually that suggests gravel mulches could produce disease suppressive soils. So it's quite the mixed bag there. But obviously, unlike other mulches, rocks do not really add carbon to the soil, though perhaps they could impart some nutrients depending on the rock. Where they can make sense is around maybe like perennial plants, shrubs, that sort of stuff, in arid regions and in pathways potentially, like that sort of xeriscaping. But the considerations are none too little. In particular, heat from the sun is easily transferred from gravel to soil, which could lead to burned roots. That said, in regions where the night temps drop dramatically, looking at you, the desert, the gravel can then release some of that heat back to moderate temperatures around plants, so that could be a beneficial thing. Fertilizing rocks would or does require either relying wholly on fertigation or is just a giant shrugging emoji. Thus, one reason, honestly, of many, why I can't see any path to really using rocks as a bed mulch of any sort. The water retention is high underneath these mulches. They may offer some long-term minerals to the soil without distracting the microbes too much from their regular jobs in the way that, say, wood chips or other carbon sources can. In extremely dry areas, they may be great for water infiltration when used smartly, like the Hohokam used rock piles to help retain water and grow agave in central Arizona, among many other arid examples like that. So anyway, I'm certainly fascinated by the use of gravels and sands as mulches, and I keep feeling like there's something there, in especially for like desert scenarios. And I think it's worth exploring more, but exploration is certainly all I'm doing right now. Definitely no recommendations, but I would like to hear from anyone who has used rocks in any way around the farm, around the garden, maybe underneath your irrigation. I'd just be curious to know what you've done. Has it worked? Has it been, the opposite of working? Let us know. And otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will keep our seeds safe. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. Farmers who partnered with Farmhand say they grew an average of 63% this year because it's more than software. Farmhand is your business coach and assistant, helping to sell out, save time, and grow smarter with real data from real farms, shaping websites that convert, campaigns that sell, and fulfillment systems that run smoothly. Curious what that looks like? Meet the founder, Ari, at farmhand.partners/no-till and see the same insights and support the fastest growing farms rely on every week. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. Today's episode is also brought to you by High Mowing Organic Seeds. High Mowing Organic Seeds is celebrating their 30th anniversary with 47 fabulous new varieties for 2026. Highlights include downy mildew-resistant cucumbers, a poppy that looks like cotton candy, and 12 new tomato varieties. High Mowing offers more than 750 varieties of certified organic, non-GMO vegetables, flowers, herbs, and cover crops, all trialed for optimal performance in organic growing systems. High Mowing has the professional quality seeds and supportive grower reps to get you from seed to harvest. Visit highmowingseeds.com to request a catalog and use code 26NOTILL, all one word, 26NOTILL, for 10% off your order of $100 or more. That's highmowingseeds.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener or viewer, enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Karen Mason, who writes, quote, "Seed storage. The seeds that I won't be using until next season, what do I do with them? The packs are inventoried and in glass jars and in a storage bin. Can I leave the bin in an unheated outbuilding, basement of the house? I have never stored this many seeds before and don't want to kill them. I am getting better at planning," end quote. All right, thank you. And a good question here. I think every year, many of us end up with at least some extra seed. So let's talk a little generally about seed storage before taking into consideration your jars in the bin that you talked about. The two things you need to think about are cool and dry. That said, the more important of those two is dryness. If you have a place that is room temperature, but it stays dry, that is honestly a better option than, say, a cool but humid basement. Fluctuations in moisture will lead to a loss in germination where basically the seeds are getting primed for use but not actually used. And priming can be great, but after about 5-6 months, the germination rates start to go down. The other important consideration is darkness, as light it will slowly degrade quality. That said, most seeds come in packages, so unless they are in clear plastic jars, etc., then the light won't be as much of an issue. If they are in clear plastic jars, as you said they are in jars, or some sort of plastic bag and then left in front of light, they are effectively in tiny greenhouses, which is not great for seeds. They should be kept out of the light regardless, but definitely if they are in tiny greenhouses. That bin you described, if it's also clear, same thing. Keep it somewhere dark so it also is not a tiny greenhouse. And or, if that outbuilding that you are keeping them in will turn really, really hot throughout the season at some point, that is also what I would consider to be a tiny greenhouse. So Let's avoid those as best we can. Pest protection is another important factor. Make sure whatever you keep your seeds in will prevent mice and other critters from getting into the seeds. Obviously, having them in jars and then the jars in the bin is probably adequate there. Weevils can be an issue for certain seeds, which is one of the nice things about keeping them somewhere cool, like a fridge, which itself is sort of a giant dehydrator, so it can be helpful for keeping moisture off. But anyway, the fridge can also help with pests like weevils. They struggle to get in, and the coldness will slow down any weevils that may have found your seeds. I've talked about this before, but we keep all of our seeds in plastic containers inside of our walk-in cooler, and they are largely fine. All that said, by and large, seeds are really resilient, so killing them is not as easy as it may seem. So long as they are out of light, safe from pests, and in a dry location, you should be good to go for most of them. Also know that some seeds like alliums just don't last for super long anyway, so you have to be aware of that. Carrots, onions, etc., their germination rates will dive over time no matter how well you keep them, though obviously better storage will help preserve some of that. Most veggie seeds can be frozen as well, though I find that to be a bit overkill, and if the freezer fails, the risk of moisture getting to the seeds is pretty high, so make sure they are also, well protected if going into a freezer. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, it is Feedback Monday time. Be right, feedback. I did it. Coffee.
Today's episode is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a proud supporter of Growers Daily. At Johnny's, they do more than sell seeds. They grow them. They trial them to see how they perform on Johnny's research farm in Maine and across the U.S. and Canada. Only the best varieties are added to their catalog and website. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seedling to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. JohnnySeeds.com. That's JohnnySeeds.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Marble Seed. The Marble Seed Organic Farming Conference attracts a wide range of regenerative and organic farmers for 3 days of skill development and community building. Farmer Drew Kramer said, "Going to Marble Seed was so invigorating at a time when I needed it most. I picked up tools I'm already using." The conference is the final week in February in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Early registration opens December 4th at conference.marbleseed.org. That's conference.marbleseed.org. All right, back to the show.
All right, so because we did not get to our typical Feedback Friday last week, we are going to just move that section over to Monday because we are flexible like that. So welcome to Feedback Monday, where sometimes we move our feedback from Friday to Monday to discuss what you all were saying about last week's topics. Last Monday, we talked about Landscape Fabrics, a farming podcast that changed me, and perennial ryegrass. At One Hubcap Farm wrote, quote, "I used the landscape fabric in the pathways for a couple seasons and it did keep down the weeds. However, I grow cut flowers and I bush hog the beds to terminate crops, and eventually it got caught in the bush hog, the landscape fabric I'm assuming here, and or weeds started growing on top of it when it was covered by plant debris. I'm in South Carolina, zone 8B, and I get a couple of turns of flowers out of each bed or more, and that is a lot of crop residue. Now I use autumn leaves and sometimes wood chips in the paths, and it all turns into a huge compost pile in place. Also, love Farmer to Farmer. I discovered him sometime around 2015 when I was still in the dreaming phase and listened to them all. This reminds me I should go back and re-listen to them," end quote. I agree. Always go back and re-listen to those. Those are great. Thank you. And this commenter touched on something about landscape fabric that is absolutely maddening and made me originally move away from using it, which is that stuff will eventually grow through and on top of landscape fabric if you keep it down for long enough. And at that point, it becomes nearly impossible to pull it up from the ground. We had some landscape fabric down for where we, kept our irrigation, where it traveled, through our farm at our old place. And when we moved to the new farm, I had to pull all of that landscape fabric up, and I was like, oh, never again. So now on our new farm, it's not even, we don't have landscape fabric around our tunnels here. We don't have it like really anywhere. Only place we have it is in our greenhouse. But for me, I would rather weed whack around that areas than ever have to mess with a landscape fabric that is kind of down semi-permanently. Or I guess I would just have to use the mower, because the mower has no trouble pulling it up. Anyway, that day, at Daniel Johnson wrote, quote, "Hey, Jesse, I wanted to throw out an idea for an upcoming show. So I've been tinkering with AI, and I have found it to be a really interesting tool for market gardens. It can help with crop plans and rotations, including helping you build a rotation. It can also help you to figure out how to maximize revenue for your farm. I am in the process of doing all of my research for my farm, and it was really helpful in designing the wash pack station, etc. It saved me probably 35 hours designing a crop plan. So maybe you have some more things that you have used it for, or maybe you already did a show on that I missed, end quote. Thank you for the comment. And obviously, longtime listeners of this show will know how I feel about AI, but let's just set aside the, like environmental costs of AI and the data centers they require and the whole sort of like borderline criminal plagiarism, copyright stuff, and just take the idea of having AI help with crop planning, etc. at face value. The first issue I see with this is unless you know how to grow in your region, or you've, grown produce before and washed and packed it and all those things, how will you know if the designs that the AI gives you are even moderately correct? Obviously, you could edit it if you have experience, or ask someone to take a look at it. But if you don't, who knows if what it's given you is even accurate? AI is good with really known, predictable things, but farming is incredibly contextual. So unless you already have growing experience, it may not be all that helpful. Moreover, crop planning is definitely complicated. Running a business is definitely complicated. Totally understand that. But the value of tackling complicated things is that you learn something you can pass on to someone else. By doing the work yourself, you effectively keep that knowledge alive. If we relegate, all the knowledge and complexity of the world to the computers, we relinquish any semblance of resilience we actually have. Resilience in that way is not just about, like the farm systems that we set up, but the knowledge that we maintain and improve upon. So can AI work? Maybe, sure. But at some point, we have to remember there is a value in the journey and doing the work and not just being handed the answer. Otherwise, if AI one day dies, even for a short time, so too does all that knowledge. AI is here to stay, no doubt about that, because there's very little political will to rein it in. But whether it can actually, quote unquote, help us is a bigger, deeper question. Last Tuesday, we discussed dirt mulches, the power of true citizenship, and winterizing the irrigation. At P. Garibaldi, that's fun to say, wrote, quote, "In south of Italy, working in soil in early summer in olive groves, almonds, and carobs is used like mulching. Very hard to have living mulch in that environment, and if you don't work the soil, it will crack and lead to even more hit in the deep of the soil. Great video like always," end quote. Thanks. And so indeed, this is a physical feature of cultivation that it will stave off cracking. It just won't really hold moisture all that well. But for sure, there are regions where a living mulch is definitely more complicated. So, because things require water to grow. So like I always say, your region will determine a lot about how you grow and how you can grow, or more succinctly, context is everything. Last Wednesday, we had the amazing opportunity to chat with Yoko Takamura of Osawага Farm in Connecticut about their farm, some Japanese veggies they grow, and also the differences between Japan and the U.S. in terms of production. Lots of great feedback that day. At Colleen Stowell wrote, quote, "Loved this episode. Learning how different regions farm is always an eye-opener. I am amazed at the similarities and differences there are in farming in different areas," end quote. And I totally agree. Hearing about the unique challenges and differences in any given area is always eye-opening to me. I always want to explore more production methods in other regions of the world, because sometimes, like it is in Japan, land is limited, or it's been farmed for many generations, or they don't have access to the same kinds of tools or seeds, etc. Then how they work around their limitations or work with their abundances, I think can spread a lot of light on what we do or don't have here in the U.S. Anyway, expect me to continue exploring the globe, and big shouts to Yoko for sharing her insight and her time. Then last Thursday, we discussed kaolin clay, if it's too late to start next year's garden, plus we looked at vermicompost and seed starting mix. At Mary Sanders added, quote, "Kaolin clay was and may still be a thickening ingredient in Mickey D's milkshakes, making said milkshakes an acceptable treatment for diarrhea," end quote. And they are obviously joking here solidly, but kaolin clay does have a very long history in traditional medicine of treating stomach issues like diarrhea, but also cuts and other skin issues. I do not, and probably will never, get into health and wellness on this podcast, so I say yes, go forth and milkshake if you're having stomach issues. Actually, never take my medical advice. That's probably the first bit of medical advice I'll give you. And finally, we tried our first best of or roundup episode on Friday and got great feedback for that. So that's great to see. I mean, even Mike and I are daunted by how much content we've put out so far. So the goal with these sort of best of roundup episodes won't only be about us being able to occasionally take a day off, in this case to travel, but to have better collective episodes to point to. So I'm not just like, I did a segment on tools here, and also this episode and this one over here, because I don't know, that's not very helpful. Anyway, thank you all, as always, for your commentary and just for your support, all the things. Otherwise, I say peace out, #Monday Life. Don't forget, No-Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors, and if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, here soon if you want it by Christmas, at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of November, you get a shout out on this show. So big shout outs today to Christopher Fraser, Rachel Thomason, Sandy, Patrick Dalbert, Rhea Paulette, and Jonathan Hicks. All right, so in today's story, this one starts with a pretty simple miscommunication. Rod tells his partner Rebecca over the phone that he will be at a restaurant called Le Chat Noir at 7 p.m. to meet Rebecca for dinner. Rebecca agrees, but the connection's not great, and she hears not Le Chat Noir, but the Chateau Benoir, which is an old hotel that no one ever goes to because it is very creepy and certainly not for dinner, but okay. Rebecca thinks maybe he knows something. Maybe the place has changed. They've cleaned it up. Maybe it's like a hip place to go now. And so she gets dressed up nice and stylishly as usual for her date. And she takes a cab over to Chateau Benoir, where our story really begins. And that is for tomorrow on The Real Black Cat. Maybe. Or maybe I'll change that. I don't know. We'll see. Thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you tomorrow. Bye.